The history of fishing in the Southern Ocean County, Jersey Shore area has been one of continually where they fish out a market, fish out a species, and then who's the culprit? Everybody's pointing fingers. When the pound fishermen came to Island Beach, the local recreational fishermen said you ruined it. They had what they called the fish wars. Later, when the pound fishing was on Long Beach Island and it died off, was it overfishing or was it the draggers? Did the lobsters stop because they suddenly started dragging for lobsters? Was it over-harvested? Were the draggers put out of business by the Russians with their factory ships? Where's the answer? It's certainly not an overfishing.
There's been overfishing for many, many years in the early days, but we didn't know what overfishing necessarily was because we didn't know what the stock size was. We didn't know how quickly it could reproduce or rebound. But now we know we have a lot more tools in working in cooperative research with the scientists and with the managers.
When I first started at Stockton some 30 years ago, the hottest thing going was tile fishing. And as a result, they wiped out the canyon margin fisheries by just overfishing it until finally it collapsed. I do believe that there's a possibility of managing it so everybody can have a piece. Nobody gets filthy rich, but nobody starves to death either.
Something has to be found. There has to be a solution where we can get the scientists together with the fishermen, with the land use people, and somehow come up with a solution that we can sustain these harvests. Otherwise, we're going to just go through a continual, we get rid of the blowfish start to come back. We get rid of the weak fish start to come back. Each time they come back weaker, and there seems to me there must be a better way to do it.
The town of Barnegat Lake, New Jersey, nestled on the northern tip of Long Beach Island, is known as a quaint fishing village. Viking Village, once called Independent Dock, was started in the 20s by the early Scandinavians who settled here.
They were mostly Norwegians, but there was a couple of Swedes, a Dane, a guy from Iceland, and I think they put in about $20 or $30 a piece, and a certain amount of hours they had to dig and move dirt and make a little deep spot in the harbor, and they organized it and incorporated it and called it Independent Fish Company.
Viking Village represents the legacy of commercial fishing in Barnegat Lake. Here, just about every type of fishing known to the eastern seaboard has been used at one time or another.
The first year I ever caught a longline, I had fish that big. So that was the beginning of the fish. I was the first guy to do it. You know,
What year was that?
That 1971, and I fished up George's Banks before anybody went up there. And spots were little tiny ones, and there were spots that were giants. So just where you fish.
I said 2 years ago was the best fishing in tile fish history as far as I'm concerned.
Why?
The amount of fish that were around was unbelievable. We were catching just as many as they were catching 30 years ago. But they look beautiful. These fish are 10 days old right now. They look beautiful. Gills are nice and red. It's beautiful fish.
I started commercial fishing full-time in 1973. I was in charter boat captain for 16 years. 1973, I quit charter fishing, went tile fishing, sword fishing. You could disappear overnight and pop in the next day. I've seen that happen 2 years ago. Like, we fished the Hudson Canyon one time in February, you couldn't get a fish. A couple weeks later, it was solid with fish. Where they come from, I don't know.
You know, fish go in cycles, in my opinion, you know, and the regulations are working well, you know, and with the restrictions, you know, it's given the chance of fish to come back. I mean, a few years ago was some of the best tile fishing there ever was. And, you know, there was a lot of big fish being caught, and you know, it's on a downward part of the cycle, but I've seen it go back and forth over the years, you know. This is my 24th year of tile fishing, and I've seen really good fishing to really poor fishing, but the regulations are helping, and we got a good fishery out here.
Harry, You ready to go?
Ernie Panacek, executive director of Viking Village, has worked to refine a quality image of a responsible commercial fisherman who manages to make a living amid an industry that is highly regulated. Panacek involves the Viking Village fishermen in keeping them abreast of these evolving regulatory changes. He attends meetings across the Mid-Atlantic and networks with other commercial fishing industry managers as a means to implement the best approach for the fishermen, as well as a quality product from the Barnegat Light commercial port.
I think the most important thing to remember about our fishermen here is that instead of complaining about regulations, they've been part of developing regulations. They've been part of establishing what's important in the regulatory process and helping the management process develop plans that allow for the fish to have a future, the fish so that we can keep fishing. I mean, that's what it's all about. Not only to provide people, the public fish for the future, to always have it on their plate for the ones that can't catch it, but for jobs for us.
Understanding of conservation is embedded in the minds of the fishermen, along with a deep understanding of the inherent dangers involved in commercial fishing, an industry rated among the most dangerous in the United States today. Stuart Farrell, coastal geologist with the Richard Stockton College Research Center, is the director of the Marine Field Station at Nakote Creek in Port Republic, New Jersey. Farrell discusses the technical aspects of the Barnegat Inlet, noted among the most treacherous on the East Coast.
Well, the biggest problem is that the large volume of Barnegat Bay is filled and emptied through this inlet. There is no inlet to the north, and the flow into the Barnegat system from Manasquan Inlet through the canal is pretty minimal, and the rest of it comes through Little Egg Inlet to the south. So this inlet is a major player in terms of filling or emptying the bay. So tidal currents and the velocity of those flows kind of makes steering difficult if the current is behind you.
Carinel was coming in the inlet on a new moon tide, and tide was running about 4 or 5 knots by the lighthouse. And when that's happening, the tide's behind you, pushes the boat sideways.
It was amazing how fast these bars would change. And the other thing is that this part of the jetty is barely emergent at high tide. In fact, the outer part of it is submerged. And if there is not much of a wave set running, those with low levels of knowledge of the inlet try to come out and do a portside turn as they come out and suddenly run aground on the rocks.
Currently, there are close to 42 commercial fishing boats who make Viking Village their home port. Gill net boats make up the largest portion of that number. Mostly fishing inshore, they are generally smaller vessels, no larger than 50 feet.
There's usually 2 guys on the boat. They have a net that's on the drum. They set the net in front of a school of fish. The fish get caught in the net with their gills, and that's why they call it a gill net boat.
Moderation is always, key in all these things. You want to catch the bigger fish and let the little ones go, and once they're of spawning age, so you always have a couple year classes of spawning fish, and that's big. To me, that's key, and that's what's good about the gill net fishery. The net fishing is that you got to have the perfect size mesh to catch what you want to catch. The big ones will bounce off, or the little ones will swim through. So, and having the right net is key every day. Because if you got the wrong one, you're going to have a long day. So I see our fishery as very sustainable, just with the selectivity of the gear. And we've done a lot of we hang all of our own gear. A lot of guys in town here do, and done a lot of experimenting, and so we're pretty good at knowing what nets to fish, and we want to maximize. Of course, it's less work to catch bigger fish, so we like catching bigger fish.
The longline commercial fishing industry, an historic fishery that once thrived in Barnegat Light, has become so highly regulated that it has suffered and diminished through time. Viking Village was once considered the tilefish capital of the world. But when the local longline fishermen saw the species dwindling in size and number, they backed off from the fishery, without prompting from fisheries managers to allow for the species to return to original proportions.
I think you just got to know where to find them. Everybody thinks they're gone, and the fishery service thinks they're wiped out, but there's little spots here and there, there's still plenty left.
For years, the longline industry has thrived on the tuna and sword fisheries, awaiting the return of the tilefish. The third industry is scalloping, and Viking Village is home to a total of 20 scallopers, 9 full-time and 12 part-time.
Scalloping's been around a long time. My Uncle Louis, which is my father's brother, he went to New Bedford and he scalloped in the 1930s. We decided to go scalloping in the early 50s. We never caught the amount of scallops we caught today. The price of scallops in 1951 was 36 cents a pound. The share for a whole trip for a full share guy was like $200 for a trip. 1978, we built the Grand Larson, and we didn't know whether we wanted to go fishing or scalloping with it. It was sort of primitive scalloping then. Now it's more refined, better dredges, computers, and now we're managed by the government.
Where other docks have kind of been too slow to accept change, I think Viking Village and Barnegat Light as a whole, they've looked at not what they can make today, but what they'll make 5 and 10 years down the road. And so everything has been forward-looking for a long time so that they will stay competitive and that they will continue to be prosperous. They've adapted over time to changes in resource abundance, and they've adapted over time to changes in environmental issues which have impacted the fishery. One good example is circle hooks. Typically they use J hooks, but over time they realized that that wasn't a good thing because if the fish swallowed the hook, it would rip the fish from the inside, so they adjusted to circle hooks, which really only catch the fish in the side of the mouth, and was much better. So if the fish was undersized, they could cut it off, the hook would rust away, and they would be more sustainable in their method. They got involved with releasing turtles and have special little tools to take a turtle mouth from a hook. They've gotten more involved in handling their seafood in a much better way. They went from bubble wrap to rice paper to make sure that the seafood was coming in a good manner.
Commercial fishing in Barnegat Light is a physically demanding job. Most of the fishermen who work here are second, third, fourth, even fifth generation. They've witnessed firsthand as species once bountiful became overfished, and they understand clearly the conservative mandates set forth in the Magnuson-Stevens Act, the legislative tool to better fisheries management.
It's a very old law, back to 1976. It's been reauthorized just a few times in its history, but that specifies all of the management requirements that the federal government has to undertake to develop and protect fisheries along all of our coasts in federal waters. Fishermen have been very involved, and they use people such as myself and others to help represent their interests back here during those reauthorizations to make sure that the federal government is taking practical steps towards protecting resources. And fishermen, I think, over time have become much more engaged in the management process. We have fishermen that serve on regional fishery management councils who are responsible for enforcing and developing regulations based on the Magnuson-Stevens Act. The law is very complicated. It's got very, very high standards, but that's what it takes to be able to fish today in today's modern world. And fishermen have to look around and see we've got scallops that's successful. We've got monkfish that's successful. There's various examples around the country. Alaskan pollock. There are lots of situations where fishing is going well. We're harvesting protein for people who don't have boats and can't catch their own food. And we're doing it in a smart way. We're protecting the parts of the environment that we have to. and we're meeting the requirements of the Magnuson Act.
We have great success stories with not only sea scallops, but we have maximum sustainable yield established with swordfish in the North Atlantic and the South Atlantic, for that matter. In working in the cooperative research process with the management, we get an advantage, and these fishermen have been very proactive in getting advantages and learning about our fish stocks and the requirements for management plans and adjustments thereof. That's what's important about it. And instead of these boats complaining, like I said, they're part of the management because they are doing the research for the scientists to show where the stocks really are, and developing tools not only to avoid sea turtles and marine mammal interaction, but also to sustain the stock and keep the boats fishing for the future.
The success of the scallop industry is credited to the cooperative attitude of commercial fishermen in their implementation of the various changing methodologies of research scientists established to extend and preserve the scallop population. Fishermen persevered while scientists struggled to determine mesh size on the scallop chains that make up their dredges.
We go on to measure the gear characteristics of the dredge. We go measure the twine top of the dredge, the rings. We measure the dredge itself just for gear characteristics, just to find out how that dredge is fishing. What we do is after the tow is dropped, we collect certain bycatch in the catch. We take that, we measure it, get length frequencies on it, get some actual weights on it, take certain biological samples, whether it be from the monkfish, taking a vertebra sample, or from any of the flats, taking scale samples for age structure. We'll also take length measurements of the scallops, the kept and the discard, and we'll also take volumetrics of the scallops as well. So we'll take 100 scallops, set them aside, have the crew shuck them, and then get a volumetrics on them to see what the yield is in a certain area. Right now I work for the industry-funded scallop program, and I think that's a success, and having observers go out there with the industry-funded scallop program and go out into the access areas, and the data that's coming back from that is a great way to manage the fishery.
Most of my career was involved in fisheries, exploratory fishing and gear development, and I also operated the National Marine Fisheries Service research vessels run by NOAA. The scallop industry has decided to be very proactive. One of the things the industry does is it sets aside 2% of its allowable catch for research. And the research is managed by the National Marine Fisheries Service. In scallop gear, which we're currently working on, the work first started with improving the selectivity of the dredges by increasing ring size. The ring is what the bag is made of. It's made of these round rings which retain the scallops, and they used to be about 3 inches in diameter. We slowly worked to develop 3.5 inch and 3 3/4 inch rings, and currently the fleet uses a 4 inch.
Over a period of time, these larger ring sizes allowed the small scallops to stay in the ocean longer. And so we may be killing just as many scallops as we did in the early 90s, but we've doubled the weight of landings. We more than doubled the weight of landings. So getting the scallops to grow larger, increase their yield, has been one of the really significant improvements in scallop management over the years.
You can take an educated guess, and what I do is I come out here and I make a couple tows, which way I think it's going, and I read what's in the dredge. That's why you see all those different angles there, because I'll change the angle of the tow depending on what I see in the dredge and which way I think the tide's going. They limit our number of days we're allowed to fish. They have these closed areas cordoned off where they let the scallops grow and grow and grow, and then they let the boats go in there and catch a certain amount of scallops, and that's been really, really good. You know, we fish under a lot of rules and regulations, but over the years, we're fishing less days. There's less wear and tear on the boats. We're burning less fuel, and we're making more money.
Another area where fishermen work hand in hand with science is in persevering through openings and closures of various scallop fishing grounds. Scientists and marine managers believe the closures allow species to refresh and repopulate during closures. In recent years, a growing dayboat scallop industry has evolved, allowing for permitted fishermen to bring the freshest product across the docks.
The groundfish plan set aside these closed areas on Georges Bank, and this is for the groundfish recovery plan. Closed area 1, Nantucket Lightship, and closed area 2. These are areas closed to mobile gear that was capable of catching groundfish. And these areas were set aside